All right, so welcome everyone to our session today for the DWR. We're going to be talking about the dreaded dissertation defense. And luckily we have a panel of people here being led by Jonathan Bridenbaker of the Center for Writing and Communication. And with us as panelists, we have on my screen going from top down bottom, we have Dr. Will Duffy from the Department of English. We have Dr. Stephen Zanskas from Education and Dr. Stephanie Ivey from the Herf College of Engineering. So I'd just like to say first, thank you and welcome to all of our guests and panelists. And yeah, Jonathan, I've given you co-host duties, so you should be able to do what you need to do.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael. So yeah, as Michael said, my name is Jonathan Bridenbaker, a graduate assistant director at the Center for Writing and Communication and a PhD candidate in the Department of Communication and Film. We're super excited to be helping with the DWR and with this panel. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and just give a short presentation introducing what the purpose of a dissertation defense is, some tips on preparing for a dissertation defense, and then some presentational tips for during your defense. So first, what is a defense and what are the objectives of a defense? There are two kind of objectives that I'd like to go ahead and highlight. First, the defense is a way for you to display your understanding of your own work, its relationship to other research in your field, and its contribution to the field. So those are the three things that you are displaying your understanding of during your defense. I'm not displaying a PowerPoint. Thank you, Michael. But then the second objective of the defense is to respond to analysis made by your committee of your work, and then answer questions that your committee has about your dissertation, whether it's the broad justification for your methods or the theory that you chose to go with, or questions about specific passages or areas in your dissertation. A committee member could ask you about a specific paragraph of a page of your dissertation, ask you to clarify what you mean there, to go into more detail. So those are the objectives of the defense, those two main things, displaying understanding and responding to analysis. So there are a couple of things that you can do to prepare for your defense. First and foremost, and one of the most important things that a lot of committee members would agree with, is the timely submission of your dissertation to your committee prior to your defense. You, at the very least, 2 weeks, if not more. Some require it even further out than 2 weeks, but you want to give your committee time to read your dissertation, time to look it over, time to come up with those questions to ask you, and they can provide you better feedback if they have the time to actually look over your dissertation, because surprise, surprise, your dissertation isn't the only thing that your committee members are having to do in their role. So give them time to read over your dissertation. Next, gather information on what types of questions that you're going to be asked by your committee. You can ask your advisor, what can I expect in my defense? What kinds of, what topics do you expect the other committee members to ask about? Even if there are specific questions that your advisor knows are going to be asked. That way, you have questions that you can practice answering. If your advisor's up to it, you can ask them to have a mock defense. If your advisor can't do it, you can ask your peers, even other friends in academia, to kind of host a mock defense for you to practice answering those questions. Now, in the event that you don't get a lot of questions or topic areas from your committee or your advisor, there's actually a really good practice outlined in Foss and Waters' Destination Dissertation. I really love this book. They have a whole chapter on dissertation defenses. One of the things they actually highlight is coming up with kind of 10 basic stock answers to different aspects of your dissertation. So thinking about your results section, how would you answer for how you arrived at different results? How would you justify the methods that you're using? How would you answer questions about the different theories that you use? Just this exercise is to get you comfortable with talking about those different aspects of your dissertation. Next, you want to present the important stuff. and cut out the fluff. Like you want to go ahead and focus on, okay, what are the most important parts of my dissertation to have an effective presentation? Just as you don't want your lit review to be the majority of your dissertation, you don't want the lit review to be the majority of your dissertation defense. You want your defense focused on your methods and the results and analysis that you got out of it. So, and really hone in on like, what are the important aspects of your defense that are necessary for your committee to hear in order to get a full idea of your dissertation. Defenses can only be 15, 20, 25 minutes. They change kind of the length will really depend on your committee or department requirements. So really determine what is important and necessary for your committee to hear out of your defense. Next, if you're using any kind of presentation software, like if you're using PowerPoint or anything, practice good presentation and PowerPoint etiquette. Don't overload your slides. Nobody wants to see people reading their slides at a dissertation defense. That's not very fun. So I usually try to follow with a PowerPoint presentation just in general. I try to follow the 7x7 rule. So 7 words per line, 7 lines per slide. It's meant to be a guide for you. Try to have contrasting colors on your slides. I recommend light color backgrounds with dark text. So just try to practice that good PowerPoint etiquette. Now, finally, what are things that you need to do during your defense? What are some presentation tips that I can give? So first is to breathe. Just take a breath, because your committee is there to help you. They're not there to work against you. It can be really intimidating going before a committee of people who've been in academia, possibly for decades. But remember, you are also an academic. You are also a scholar. You're coming into this having done research on your dissertation topic. You probably know more about your dissertation topic than most of the people on your committee, because you've spent an intimate amount of time with that topic. So just have confidence. Know that you are a scholar, you're an academic, you know what you're talking about, and that confidence will carry you a long way, along with all of the preparation that you've done up until your defense. So yeah, that's just my short spiel about dissertation defenses and presentation tips. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over. I'll kind of go in the order of people I see on my screen. So we'll go first to Dr. Will Duffy to kind of provide some insight into dissertation defenses. Then after all of our panelists go, we'll have an audience Q&A. So Dr. Will Duffy.
Yeah, thanks. I wasn't here to hear about how everything's been going today. But I'm just going to preface by saying I'm probably I take a special pleasure in critiquing all of the sacred cows associated with these kind of rituals. Everything from what a dissertation is and should be to things like defenses. I think a defense, the way that they're kind of structured right now, it's kind of antiquated, kind of pointless in a lot of ways. If your committee has been doing their job, and as evidence of this, like I just want to point out, like Michael, used the word like the dreaded defense, right? Like this is something that like this idea that like a defense is something that you should dread is unfortunate, because it really shouldn't. An ideal defense for me, in my opinion, is when the student comes in and has a conversation and leaves with not only a very clear sense of sort of what needs to happen to this particular document before you submit it to the graduate school, but also, more importantly, if not a better sense of what's going to happen next with this project. Is this something that, depending on your career trajectory, is this something that you want to try and, turn into some journal articles? Is this maybe like going to become a book manuscript draft at some point? Or, and this is absolutely okay too, are you just fucking tired of this project and you want to put it away and not ever touch it again? That is also okay in some cases. I do think that if you've kind of been, I mean, that's unfortunate if that's ever the case, but it happens. And so I think sort of, and I should say too, this is very contingent on your committee. I also think that you should take a leading role in planning your defense with your committee in terms of, one of the things that Jonathan was pointing out is that, it's very common, committees can ask questions about your project. And that's good, because I think you should be able to ask questions sort of on the spot about your project. At the same time, I'm never going to let a student have a dissertation defense if I'm not prepared to pass them at that point. Again, which is another point of why I think that sort of all the anxiety associated with a defense is sort of needlessly manufactured. Again, there are absolutely advisors out there that aren't very good and supportive. And so I would say, if you don't put those people on your committee in the first place. But I guess the couple, I like two, I don't know if tips is the right word, but two things that I always tell students when they're preparing for a defense is one, I'm always interested in sort of understanding. So again, and you might so the history of defense was this kind of public event, and all defenses I think are still open to the public. Some programs and departments, they have a culture of people going and supporting them. In the English department here, we really don't, unless you're a linguist. And so and a lot of times it's just going to be you and your committee. And in those cases, I have read the dissertation. I've read it. I don't need a recap of it. However, the thing that I'm really interested in is sort of figuring out what did you learn through this process? What was this process like for you? And because again, at the end of the day, a dissertation, you're going to write just one of those in your life. Unless you're crazy, you're just going to write one of these in your life. It's the one genre in academia you only do one time. And, and so I want to know, what are you going to again, assuming, depending on your trajectory, what you want to do, I want to know sort of, okay, whatever it is we're going to do with this project, fine, but how are you a better researcher, a better writer, a better thinker, a better teacher? What did this event, how are you processing this? And so I always tell students, when you're working on this presentation, you do have to give sort of the elevator pitch, and there is value in that. So I'm not gonna, say otherwise, but I do think I'm more interested in knowing, again, sort of what are the takeaways, not necessarily of your project, but of the experience of doing the project. Because I think that when I can sort of hear what students observe in that sense, it always sort of helps me get a sense of how prepared they are for the next steps of their career, whatever that is. So that's the first thing I would always say is sort of be prepared to say a little bit about, the journey itself. If your dissertation is exactly what your prospectus said it was going to be, personally, I think you probably didn't do a good job of it. I'm a writing is thinking kind of person. And so I want to know, how did the final project, how is it different from what you thought you were going to set out and do, and why, and what's interesting about that? So that's the first thing. The second thing is always come with some questions about and some ideas about what you want to do with this project going forward. Because I think that one of my jobs as a committee member is to help students hone in and focus in on those next steps. I think that, if you really want to, maybe depending on your project, if you really want to try and write a book about this thing. All right, so come in. I want to know essentially I want to know, okay, so what would a book version like this look like for you? Or if you come in with questions, you say, hey, I think I want to turn this into a book, but I don't know how. Then that's where I get to say, okay, well, let's talk about the differences between a dissertation and a book proposal or something like that. If you know that you want to do something, but you're not, maybe I want to spin an article out of this or something like that. I want to hear okay, like what chapters and why? In other words, come in with some definite ideas about possibly what you want to do with this project. And again, and these are sort of, I don't want to sort of highlight the idea of like the academic trajectory, because that's not always the case. Maybe you're just interested in like doing some writing for the general public about this project. Maybe you're interested in figuring out like how this project can be used to produce some pedagogical materials or something like that. But again, I'm like, those are fun conversations, I think, both for the dissertation writer and the committee, because now you're sort of like in this sort of like production meeting, and you're thinking about, okay, so we have this draft here, there's this sort of really interesting knowledge work happening, what's next? And so again, like so all of the advice about sort of be prepared to answer questions and explain things and defend your method or whatever, those questions to me are almost always performative, because again, like if a committee member has a problem with your methodology, that's on your committee member, because they've had time to talk to you. But again, like the more important question for me is always about, okay, so maybe this methodology is a little bit flawed, but this is dissertation, you've written it, let's move on. All right, so how can we address your method in an article manuscript or something like that? And so anyway, so that's my quick 2 cents. I want to know a little bit about the story of the project, who you are, why you're a better person for having written a dissertation, that kind of thing. And I want to know sort of what do you want to do with it? And if you don't know what you want to do with it, like give us some guiding questions then, like give us some very particular questions. What are you having? What sort of is in your way from imagining a potential future? Because here's the thing, like no one expects you to know how to take a dissertation and turn it into something else. Like you have to learn that through the doing. And so come with some questions about the future of your project. I'll just pause there.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Dr. Duffy. So next, we're going to go ahead and move on to Dr. Stephen Zanskas. So take it away.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you. Well, Will, you're going to be a hard person to follow. We agree in a lot of ways. And, I'm going to start off by saying really getting a doctorate, you look at the Carnegie Foundation stuff, they talk about people that earn a doctorate become a steward of their profession. So your dissertation is really just a demonstration of your ability to do research, communicate what you found and how you analyze that data, but also whatever that type of data is, but also how you defend it and knowing how to especially academia is a very critical place, right? And so how do you defend what you did and how do you respond to criticism? And there shouldn't be a lot by the time you get to the defense. I agree. By this time, it should be kind of pro forma. You should have had a lot of feedback. If you've been working with your chair, you should be getting a lot of feedback on where you are, even the questions. I know I would provide questions that I can anticipate you're being asked based upon what I have read and based upon reviewing for journals and things like that. But you're really there to answer those questions and describe what it is that you're learning, what it was, whatever is new, because that's part of earning a doctorate. Doesn't have to be earth-shattering. For most of us, it did not change it didn't become our entire future profession. It is a research project. So don't make it bigger than it is. It is a project to demonstrate your ability to do research, whatever form that is, in whatever discipline that you're in. I'm in the College of Education. I'm a counselor by background. In the College of Education, we have multiple programs and they have slightly different approaches to how things are done, but we're still the same fundamental process. You've written your dissertation, you've done the research, you're analyzing that information, you're discussing it, saying what's new based upon the precedent of past research. So you have to know the topic. And Will, when you were talking about it, I always expect basically that student that's coming in and Jonathan, you actually are the experts in the topic by that point. You should have been spending so much time in that you know that, so that I can't even ask some of the questions that I might ask if I were more aware of your topic. So don't make it bigger than it is. It's something to be done. And when you're preparing for those questions, have that conversation with your chair and talk with them. I know one of the questions that I normally ask, and it goes to what Will was saying, is I will ask, what would you do differently? Based upon everything that you've done, what would you do differently? And how would you approach that, however you did it? And some people do historical research, and some people are doing archival, and some are doing big data, and some are doing, evidence-based studies. And there's just a substantial difference in how people are researching. I serve on committees in our department, the Counseling, Ed, Psych, and Research Department, but also in leadership, occasionally in ICL, Instruction and Curriculum Leadership. The cultures are all fairly different, but they've become much shorter given the pandemic, I've noticed. And because our college no longer has a building because of HVAC renovation project, a lot of these things have gone to Zoom. So in the past, when I first came to the University of Memphis, they could have been 2 hours long. Now they're about 45 minutes to an hour. And the expectation on you're doing a presentation, most of us expect some kind of presentation, but it's really just, those are outline bullet points for you to remember. And we've already heard you demonstrate knowledge of the literature in your proposal meeting. So now we're really looking at, again, methods, results, how you interpret that, what does it mean, what did you learn along the way? And I think those are really the bigger points. I think a lot of the pressure and anxiety people feel about dissertations is in part we place on ourselves. Every one of the committee members that is there went through the same process. I know when I was a doctoral student, I referred to it, I felt like I was being hazed, but I know I wasn't, but I felt that way. The whole purpose is, again, whether or not I have earned that degree. And one of the things that's different about the doctorate, for most of us, it's the first time in our educational process that we've really had to generate something original. Usually the educational process, even through a master's, is knowing the material that somebody presents and being able to provide it back. And then you get to the doctorate and then we say, okay, now you're an adult. You're no longer a child. Now you're an adult. And now you can go from just telling us what we've provided to you to creating something brand new and original. That's a really difficult transition. And it's, I don't think all of us are really prepared for that. So know that that dissertation, that's the end point. By the time you're there, you really have been prepared. As long as you've been open and honest with your chair and your committee members about what's going on. We do have something different. Maybe, I don't know if English department does journal dissertation manuscripts, but we have two formats. We have a journal dissertation manuscript, and then we have the traditional dissertation. Some people talked about the journal dissertation manuscript as being a shorter version, and I would tell you it is not shorter, it's longer, and it's probably more complex. And I think any of us that have taken their dissertations and carved it out into manuscripts or some other, if you're especially journal articles, feel that it would probably been easier just to start all over from scratch and do a different study, because it's really difficult, often more difficult, to carve out your dissertation into specific articles because of the way you've written it. So I don't know if I'm hitting the points that you wanted me to hit, Jonathan, but the whole point is I think that every one of us have gone through it. Most of us, we've invested a lot of time in you. We're invested in your success. There is anxiety, but I think it's probably what we bring, or what I did bring and what you bring as a student or as a doctoral candidate, more than what we're intentionally trying to provide. In the past, some of the departments in our college made the dissertation defense a celebration. I think we've moved away from that because there are times it is an evaluative process that people may not get feedback that they thought, and it might be based upon how they presented the material. So now we're not expecting food. We're not expecting that you cater in, you don't have to bring in a catering service for us. It's not a banquet and a buffet while you do your presentation. It really is a much shorter meeting just to have you demonstrate and have that conversation that Will was talking about. Here's what I did. Here's what I learned. Here's what I would do differently. Here's where I would like to go with this. And the chair is really just a note taker and also somebody there to protect you in a way, to step in if there's a question that maybe you weren't prepared to ask, to try and help redirect that in a way so that you can actually address it in what I would, I've worked in a lot in hospitals, what I would say in a medically polite manner, which is maybe academically polite manner, but how you defer that question. And a lot of times it might be, did you think about doing this, which they should have asked before. And usually it's financial, and that's why you did what you did, because you have limited finances as a doctoral candidate. I know I did. So I did what I could do given the money and the things that I had. And so the real easy answer to that is, yes, I did. And that's something that I would be looking at doing in a future study. But for the purposes of this study, I focused here. And it's just having those real quick methods of kind of deflecting that, still being honest, but acknowledging what somebody has said. So hopefully that helps. I don't want to keep going on, so I'll turn it over to Stephanie. And if you have questions, I'm happy to answer at any time.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Zanskas. So we're going to move on to Dr. Stephanie Ivey.
All right. Well, there's not a lot left to say, so I will definitely be quick. So I'm from the College of Engineering, and I don't know if any of you are in engineering or sciences. I'm sure that our approach is probably a bit different from some of what you've heard today. I think we tend to be more on the, maybe, I think as Dr. Duffy described it, the antiquated side of things. So a lot of our defenses are a bit longer and maybe are a little bit more traditional, I guess I would say. But that being said, and it certainly still causes lots of anxiety for students. And, one of the things that I've always tried to talk with my students about is, everybody fixates on the defense, and, it's like this big, thing that you have to get through at the end. And I think if we shift away from thinking of it as some sort of culminating thing like that, and more as you're really preparing yourself through the entire process of your dissertation research for this. So it's not something you're cramming for right before you're presenting. You've been preparing this entire time. So you know what you've done, you're very familiar with your work and your process, and you've really developed the expertise that you're then just simply displaying in this final defense. So I think thinking of it as it's something you're preparing for at the outset, and not something that you're just trying to cram for right before you do it, is maybe a different way of looking at it. And I think one of the things that you hopefully learn along the way is really kind of a process for research. And so you're really developing your skill sets and your individualized way of approaching research. And so if you think of it like that as well, the defense aspect of it is something, if you do go down an academic pathway, that you'll be doing over and over and over and over, because every time you submit a publication or a manuscript for publication, at least in engineering, we don't get back, yes, great, published. I mean, you get back all sorts of feedback about things they think you should have done differently, or they don't understand and they want you to clarify. So it's an iterative process before that gets published. And it's the same kind of thing that you're learning through that dissertation research and that defense aspect is, thinking through very carefully, why did I set things up the way I did? Why am I, approaching it in this way? What do I think I have learned from this? What am I showing in my results? And, how is this contributing to the body of knowledge? Because that's always what you're going to be doing if you remain in that academic career path. And so I think looking at it as more of a way to develop your process of thinking about your work and about how you approached it so that you are able to respond to that. Because, even when you get feedback from journals, there will be things where you're like, oh, wow, that's a really good point. I should have done that. I'll go back and do that, and so I've, now you edit that manuscript to include whatever it is that maybe you should have thought of. But there are also going to be things that you look at, you're like, no, I really didn't need to do that, and here's why. And so it's the same kind of process, whether you're doing your defense or you're responding to review comments from a paper you're submitting or a proposal or whatever. So I think, again, just thinking about it more in terms of a process. The other thing I would say too is communication is essential all along that process. So the students that I have seen that have struggled in their defense, it's generally because they didn't communicate well throughout that process. They weren't meeting with their committee regularly, or maybe they met with their advisor, but they didn't meet with anybody else. And so when they get to the point of the defense, it really is the first time some of these people have seen it because there hasn't been that ongoing communication. So that's definitely something you want to make sure that you're doing, is keeping your entire committee informed throughout your research and making sure that you're getting their input along the way and that everybody has kind of a stake in the outcome, because that's really the key. Is you want all of the committee members to feel like, they did have that input and they do understand what you're doing and why you're doing it. And, they kind of feel not ownership, but like they've contributed in some way. So you want them all to be involved. And then this was something that Dr. Duffy was mentioning in terms of telling your story. And that's literally the same words I use every time I talk to my students is, and I know in engineering, most of the time, as soon as I say that, they're like, what, but the reason for that is, it doesn't matter what kind of content it is, you have to tell the story, whether you are presenting your defense or you are submitting a paper or you're writing a proposal, any of that. You have to tell the story because you've got to be able to explain, what it is that you're doing, why you're doing what you're doing, what you found, and then why does it matter? And so if you organize it in that way and really think of it as conveying a story, it really helps not only you remain focused and kind of on track with what you want to present, but it also really helps the committee. Because they are able to follow along with you and they don't go down rabbit holes that way. So making sure that you're really organizing it and tying all of the pieces together and really connecting those dots is really important. And then the last thing I'll say is that I think it's important for students to realize that everything they do is going to have limitations. So often everybody fixates on, this has to be right. This got to be, perfect. It's never going to be. You will never do anything that does not have some sort of limitation to it. And so it's recognizing what those are and being upfront about them at the beginning and saying, I know I haven't included this, this, and this. Here's why I didn't, but here's why I still think what I've done is of value and matters and is contributing to this body of knowledge. And so, a lot of times I think students shy away from recognizing limitations because they're afraid it's going to make their work look like it's not good or it's not valid. And that's not the case at all. So I just think realizing there will be limitations, being fine with that and being able to explain why what you have done still makes an impact or a difference or results in something of value is important.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Dr. Ivey. One more thank you for all of our panelists. It was a lot of really, really great advice, insight that they provided for us today. So now we're going to go ahead and move in to the audience Q&A. We're going to leave this open. So we don't really have a lot of people in here, so I don't really see the need for us to do like the whole Zoom hand raising queue. So if you have a question, you can go ahead and jump in. We're going to go ahead and do that for the last 20 minutes.
I actually do have a question, even though I'm not a graduate student and I'm already through my defense, but I was just wondering if anyone on the panel is like, what are some of the biggest mistakes you have seen students do either in the preparation for the defense or during the defense itself? Just like the biggest things, like you just like, it happens and you're just like, oh my gosh, how did you just do this? I thought we covered this, or why didn't you ask me about this sooner?
I can answer one experience I had is a student really wasn't honest with me about the feedback that other faculty members had provided to them when I directly asked them about that. And when it came to the defense, then somebody said, well, you did something what I thought they were actually being advised to do based upon the communication from the student. And it had to do with having an external faculty member from another university. So there wasn't the same level of participation. So I take responsibility for that in part because I should have been more aware of that. But the student wasn't completely forthcoming because they wanted to do what they wanted to do rather than what in that case, it was a methodologist had advised. And it ended up in creating a lot of work for them. It ended up being a dissertation that was passed with major revisions. And they were truly major revisions. And I, as the chair, was charged on working with them through that. And I had to work with them. So I think being honest, that idea of communicating well, and if there's a problem, to bring it up right away. Or having somebody say, I planned on doing this type of data analysis as another example, and then just verifying, well, but what I have won't support that. Is it okay if I use a different statistic? And just saying, yes, your statistic in that case is your data dictates what statistic you're using. In one case, the student communicated really clearly and everybody knew right from the beginning. In another, all the committee members were thrown off by one faculty member saying something different that we were completely all unaware of. And it had to do with just being open and not trying to push through the process. You'll eventually earn your doctorate. It's a matter of persevering. That is part of it. It does take time. And knowing that when a faculty member holds you back and says, you don't really want to send that out as it is, it's not because they're trying to harm you. They're actually trying to help you and protect you from this critique. And this is probably not the analogy that I should use, but like sharks swimming around when they can sense blood and now they're all going to go in. That's typically not what happens, but it can happen when there's something that's very glaring that no one expects, that you as a student might be aware of, and people may question, but be honest about it so that we can actually help you address that rather than have it come up as a criticism later on. I don't know if that's a good answer to that, but in my experience, I've had it happen one time out of 14 years. So it hasn't happened often, but that still, I think about it and it just makes me cringe when I think about it because of the amount of work it took for the student, and we could have allayed that really easily. Don't make it harder on yourselves.
I want to echo something that Stephanie pointed out, which I think is pretty important. And I sometimes see graduate students not really think through this aspect of their work, but the idea of acknowledging and recognizing the limitations of your project, I think is really important. Because again, I think that, on the one hand, you've gotten to this point in the process where, rightfully so, you should be feeling relieved. You should be feeling proud of yourself. You should be feeling you met this major accomplishment. When really, again, the dissertation is, I guess, I don't know, at least in like the humanities field, people don't read dissertations, right? Your committee reads them. Maybe if you have a very, very, very patient and loving spouse, maybe they will. But I can tell you right now that even your spouse won't read the books you publish. But again, but really, a dissertation is just, it's a first draft. It's a first attempt. It's a first attempt at the articles you're going to go on and publish, or the future research you're going to do, or whatever. And so I think, being able to acknowledge the limitations of your study and your research is very important. And again, like in terms of Michael, like this isn't really like something I see like a mistake, but I think that sometimes, and again, this is one of the reasons why I think the defense conversation can be really important, is helping students understand the difference between the significance of their project and then the application of their project, because those are related ideas, but they're different. And I do think that, as you're working on your project, the significance of it should be manifesting slowly as you move along. But a lot of times it's okay if you don't really have the application part figured out. And so, I think that, again, just coming prepared to recognize that, like, some people are going to be talking about, we talk about this phrase, like the so what, like what's the takeaway, right? Well, again, like there's the scholarly significance. Why does this matter that this work, what kind of knowledge is being amended, added to, but then that application, sort of, what are we supposed to do with this project? And again, like, here's the thing, like the cool thing about a dissertation is that maybe maybe what you're doing, like in this, so Steve works in the College of Education. There's some really, like, educational philosophers are always writing really cool stuff about methods and about like innovative work. And that's like, maybe the significance of your dissertation really isn't necessarily in the content, it's in how you've done this, how you've done this study, right? So maybe that's the application part of it, right? Maybe the application part of it, again, maybe it's more pedagogical. It's in terms of how you're going to use your dissertation to sort of develop some new curriculum of some kind. So anyway, so I think that, like, just coming in and thinking about and understanding that scholarly significance and application are two different things, and that you don't have to have both of those figured out, and that this is one of the reasons your committee is there, right? Your committee should help you articulate these things. And so feel free to ask those questions. I mean, there is, like, if someone were to say to me in a defense, I've just spent the last, year and a half writing this project, and I don't know why it's relevant. Like, why, outside of the fact that, like, it was really interesting to me and I had fun. That's an honest question. Let me help you answer that, so.
And I completely agree with that. And one of the things that we always tend to do with our dissertation committees is there's always somebody on there who, whatever the focus of the dissertation is, it's pretty far outside what they do. And it's because they come at things with a very different perspective. They aren't stuck in the same mindset as the rest of us. And so they can really provide a lot of valuable insight and really help you kind of narrow in on, like, what is the value here, because they see, it from more of a big picture perspective. But one of the things that I would say that I think I see students do that can really derail their defense is, there may be a question that is asked that you do not know how to answer. And rather than just making a bunch of stuff up and kind of talking in circles, it's much better to say, I haven't thought about that particular aspect a whole lot. So I'm not sure that I have a real in-depth answer for you right now, like, here's how I would think about it. And this is the approach I would take. And this is how I would figure that out. And, I can come back to you later if you would like. Something like that is way better than just a bunch of like, bleh, that may have absolutely nothing to do with what it is they've asked you. And then they start going, oh, they don't really understand what they're doing. So now I'm going to pick on that thing they just said that has nothing to do with this. And, you can just really spiral out of control that way. So I think not being afraid to say, hey, I haven't thought about that. Here's how to approach it. I can get back to you. That's okay.
That's a really good point. It's just acknowledging the question and how you would address it, given what you know at this point, not confabulating or making up an answer, because that's when the people are going to start coming in and saying, well, I don't know. They may have been all for that defense and thought prior to listening to you, after reading it, that you were ready. But if that happens, then they're questioning.
Awesome. Thank you. Also, we do have about 8 minutes left. So we have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. So if anybody in the audience has any questions that you're burning to try to get out, go ahead and do that. So if anybody has any questions, you could just speak up.
So I have a couple, but I'll ask one. So you mentioned Dr. Zanskas that thank you. Sorry, I have a 90-pound pit bull that's being like very needy today, and he thinks he's a lap dog, so he's gonna be
That's
like
okay.
trying to paw at me and all that stuff. Okay, so like you mentioned that you had a candidate that passed with like heavy revisions, and that was something that should have been communicated. There should have been like more open lines of communication. So the candidate wasn't open about some of the feedback they were getting. So I have kind of 2 questions. Actually, I lied. Sorry, Jonathan, I have 2 questions. One, and I'm meeting with my advisor next week, and we're going to go through a lot of this, but I want y'all's feedback as well. I'm not exactly sure like the involvement of my whole committee and my writing process and what that should look like. So right now, my committee got my first chapter, but that was mostly because I've been on the job market and they had to write letters of recommendation for me. So now my chair has my second chapter, and like I don't know if my whole committee wants to continually read all the chapters as they evolve, or if I need to just get like a full revised draft from my chair and then give it to my committee. So I want to know like what is, as faculty who have served on tons of committees, what's the workload that you guys are familiar with? What's best practices for the workload that I should be asking my whole committee outside of my chair to do to make sure that we're all on the same page by the time I get to my defense? And then 2, my second question is, if there is heavy revisions, I'm working on like a really hard deadline for when I have to graduate based on where my job search is going. So like I'd be really like hearing like that you can pass with like really, really heavy revisions and knowing that I'm gonna have a short period of time to make those revisions if I want to graduate when I'm telling all these job applicants that I'm going to. So what's the average length of revisions as long as the committee's on the same page? So that's 2 questions.
I don't know what I can say if there's an average length. There are very few people that pass with no revisions at all. Very, very few. And because there's always something that, a lot of eyes look at something and they'll see something that people have read 5 times over and maybe have read 5 times over, and they'll miss it because they've seen it so often. They read what they think they're seeing and what they know is supposed to be there, but it's something subtly different. But most people, I would say the majority of people pass with minor revisions. That's what I see most often here. A few people I've seen, not even a handful, pass with no revisions at all. And a few that have passed with major revisions. In that case, it was the student not reliably reporting back feedback and trying to do something a little different even than what they were being advised to do, but saying that it was okay. And that really harmed that student, I think, in the sense. Now they did finish, they did graduate, they now have a doctorate, but I think it made the process harder and it would have just been a lot easier to bring it up. but I don't know, like average, I can't tell you average because our dissertations can range from this really long qualitative dissertation to some briefer quantitative dissertation to a mixed methods where it can be really long. But I would say most are minor revisions, and most truly are minor. And usually those are a negotiation, so in the committee, at least oftentimes in our college, the committee can approving the final dissertation. Like they're going to defer the authority and say, okay, like I could say, Will or Stephanie, you're the chair. I have complete confidence in your ability, which basically means I have to do all the work with the student, and the student and I are doing the work, and it doesn't go back to the committee. And for the most part, I'm happy doing that because it's a negotiation. I'll ask the faculty, okay, what are the absolute, when you're not in the room, even if you're in a breakout room and separate off on Zoom, what are the things that you feel must happen in order for this person to pass? And then I'll work with you as a student on doing and accomplishing those things. There are some things that are just a matter of style, and I'm not necessarily concerned as much with the matters of style because each of us will have a different style of writing. So I don't know how that answers your question, but most are going to fall minor revisions. Most really truly are minor. And that range of what is minor can, even the people I've seen that have passed, they may actually have had some minor revisions, but they were so minor, they just said pass and didn't even put any other qualifier on it, but they still had to do something. It was really minor. So that's normally where they fall. Minor is one of those things, and different faculty members have a different idea of what minor is, but usually there's pretty close agreement. I haven't been on a dissertation defense where there have been dissenters at the time of the dissertation defense. And when I've chaired, I haven't had that ever occur because there's communication between the committee members, the student, and we all kind of know where we are. There can be a problem. When I was a doctoral student, there was somebody that wasn't my chair, and I was asking for feedback on part of my dissertation. They came back in a really caustic way, truthfully. In fact, I was really surprised because this person had always been, kind of a mentor. And I was shocked by that. And I went back to my chair. And at that point, for that one, he said, well, don't send out material before the chair had actually read it and said, okay, now send it to that person. So I would go back to the chair and ask them. I know for me, even though after that, I never completely trusted that faculty member that was so caustic and abrasive when I really just had a legitimate question about something I hadn't done before. And I wrote something and said, is this kind of what it should look like? And just trying to get the feedback. So sometimes that can happen, and that's an issue.
Awesome, thank you. So are you all pretty familiar with reading, like when you're not the chair and you're just the committee member, do you read the dissertation more than once before the defense? So that's like really common practice for faculty?
Well, you'll have read you'll read the first 3 chapters. Mm-hmm. I may not have seen all of the subsequent chapters before. I'll have read the first 3 chapters because that'll have been your proposal. And I'll have already seen that, but I don't always get to see the entire dissertation before. I don't always get everybody sending out, here's my chapter 4, here's my chapter 5. And if it would happen, it would be only after the chair said, okay, this is good enough where you can send it out. As a chair, a lot of times when we have a methodologist, I'll ask the student to send it to the methodologist, get their feedback. Then we'll look at their feedback before it goes out, and we'll address anything that's also there. I'll read it, then the methodologist, and then after we've read it, we might send that out to everybody so that if they had any questions. But we don't routinely send out chapter by chapter. It's the first 3 chapters. That's more typical in what I've seen, and then send out as we get closer to that end mark. And we do want at least 2 weeks.
Are those dissertations written as like a introduction, literature review, methods, results?
That's the traditional format. Yeah. Even, and then the journal manuscript format, there you have to provide a copy of the journal publishing guidelines, and we review according to that journal's guidelines and give you feedback as if we were a blind peer reviewer. And so that's a slightly different process. Again, not necessarily easier process, but different process. So it'll vary with different colleges too, and different departments have their own culture on how they do things.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your feedback.
You're welcome. I would ask your chair.
Yeah, definitely gonna have that conversation with her next week. But it's just nice to hear from other people too, before I'm just like, hey, are y'all gonna read my stuff a bunch? And they're gonna be like, no, like.
Some will say that. Some will, why did they, I'll get feedback and I'll get a question like, why did they send that to me? Or I've had somebody send it out to a bunch of people and I'm thinking, okay, I haven't even seen it yet. And you sent it out to all these people. And then they received feedback in a way that maybe wasn't as constructive or in the way that I may have phrased something. And I think it was that point where people might decide, well, yeah, you really weren't trying to hold me back. It really did need work before it went out, because I'll say something and I think in a I don't know, kinder way than maybe somebody else might.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, we're just a little bit over time, but Michael did say in the chat that some of these things have gone over just a little bit. So does anybody have any final like burning questions that they hadn't gotten so far? Yeah, I'll just kind of leave it at that. And if not, then we can go ahead and wrap up. All righty, well, I'll go ahead and pass it back over to Michael to kind of give us some kind of concluding remarks. Thank you all again for this discussion.
Yeah, so I just like to say thank you again to Dr. Zanskas, Dr. Ivey. Dr. Duffy had to hop off a little bit early. He had a 1:30. But yeah, thank you to everyone for participating in this. My goal when actually Jonathan came up with this idea when I was brainstorming DWR stuff with CWC, he came with the idea of something on defense, and I was like, that's great, because the big part that I think about why I thought this was a great idea was sort of demystify this entire process and the event of it. And to just underscore and reiterate everything that our guests have said today, the biggest takeaway is your defense is a collaborative process with you and your committee chair and your broader committee to a degree. And then communication is key. As each and every one of the panelists said at some point, there should be no surprises at your defense. Everything should be discussed with your chair, planned out with your chair to some degree. The idea of actually getting questions before from your chair that they will ask is amazing. I didn't have that, though. My chair did give me my comps questions beforehand, which is not always typical depending on your comps form, but that's another panel for another time. And so, yeah, there should be no surprises. Communicate with your chair. If you have a question, if you are afraid of something, discuss it with your chair. And if your chair is someone that is not willing to collaborate you with that process, maybe you should think about changing chairs in some way, because they do not seem like they would be an effective mentor. Now, that's again something that is up to your committee, your department, your discipline, and everything else, but it should be a collaborative process. And yeah, that's all I just wanted to underscore. So thank you again to everyone. And thank you so much for all of your thoughts, your communication. And even though we did have a small group today, this recording will live on the DWR LibGuide, so that students from here into the future will be able to access this wonderful resource. So thank you again for participating. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you. Goodbye.